Mafia 2 is a truly brilliant storytelling piece, but as I went over in a previous video of mine, it's far from a perfect game. Don't get me wrong, it has an abundance of redeeming qualities going for it. In fact, the positives outweigh the negatives considerably. But as things turn out, this game had some DLCs that I've never played, and though I can scarcely find a shred of a positive attitude towards them online, I decided to fire them up and play through all 3 of them, or at least as much of them as I could stomach. Because while I was fully prepared for this reality, playing these expansions, if you can even call them that, was such a mind-numbing experience, it encouraged me to take a very long walk into the rain and evaluate my life choices, only to return soggy and still feel compelled to talk about them. Why? Because I'm on a bit of a Mafia kick with The Old Country coming out soon. So, the DLCs are broken down into 3 chapters: The Betrayal of Jimmy, Jimmy's Vendetta, and Joe's Adventures. I know what you're thinking. Who the f*** is Jimmy? Well, now that I've played the DLCs, I can tell you with confidence it's this guy, but to be honest, I still don't know. And then Joe's Adventures. Joe needs no introduction whatsoever. We're reintroduced to Joe Barbaro, except this time we're playing as him. So, what's wrong with these expansions? What could possibly be present or missing that makes playing them such an arduous experience? What could possibly downgrade the main game's brilliance to such a fundamentally painful slog? Well, let's get into it. I'm going to talk about the DLCs in the descending order. Now, I didn't complete any of the 3 of them, and you'll absolutely see why by the video's end if you haven't played them for yourself in the past. The reason, of course, being the value is very front-loaded if present at all, but I played enough of them to know the gist of why they're pagged experiences. Anyway, all that means, to begin with, we're going to be looking at the Betrayal of Jimmy, where we play as a guy named Jimmy, a hairless gentleman who wears sunglasses and absolutely has zero backstory. A protagonist entirely unaffiliated with the main game. He just kind of exists now and sleeps in Vito's various houses for some unknown reason. The game doesn't bother to explain Jimbo here's existence in this world. He kind of just spawned in for the purpose of being a vessel for some open world madness. There's an incredibly minimal plot with maybe a minute of cutscenes tops, and everything else is conveyed through splash screens, meaning it doesn't matter how good those screens are, or in this case, aren't, anything remotely similar to a narrative is not of a memorable quality. So, who Jimmy is never truly explained at all. He's just a bald guy with some sunglasses and a reliable hitman for some nondescript mob that never shows up. You know, that know a guy who knows a guy trope? Well, here he is. He's nobody of nowhere. He has no background, no surname. He is just an guy. A husk for us to control as we enact carnage upon Empire Bay. So, what does an guy do? Simply, mobster errands. Minimally plot-injected repetitive objectives that might pertain to stealing cars, wrecking stores by finding every destructible object in the shop, or bar, or killing somebody. Most of the time is spent driving from A to B, and overall, that's really all the DLC has to offer. It's dull. To make matters worse, everything you do is on a timer, so if you take too long to complete an objective, you fail, which is odd, as the timer is promoted as a bonus timer with a green graphic, as opposed to the main story's red one whenever it annoyingly rocks up. This timer is in every mission, no matter what the contents of that mission are. This means you could be timed while following somebody, or are engaged in a chase that you have no means whatsoever to end early in any capacity, and the timer is never explained outside the arcadey nature of the overall gameplay of these expansions. Otherwise, it's just there to instill artificial stress in rather straightforward objectives. And that's another thing. The timer's very presence is further indication that these missions will not be awfully complex, and it's also assurance that if you do fail a mission, you will be restarting it from the beginning. But considering their overall lack of complexity, that is not inherently a problem. The timer itself is often generous, so it's never truly at risk of wearing down outside the missions maybe where you're sent to smash up businesses and you must seek out every destructible object in a shop or bar or something. These objectives are irritating as they make you get bored of destroying things, and you'll often be tasked with hitting 2 or 3 places like this a pop, and the timer will be worn out by the time you've just about done one. Therefore, you need to memorize where every destructible object is of hundreds and blitz them all as quickly as possible. Hand grenades aren't even useful here. Then on top of that, you've got to manage your ammunition situation as it'll take everything you've got. It screams cut content that was cut for good reason, and ultimately is what made me check out of this first DLC. And that might be why Jimmy has no backstory whatsoever, as it is just that. He is a surrogate character for what Vito was supposed to be doing in between missions in the main story, but they were cut out because the content wasn't good. Albeit said content has been given an arcadey finish, but it doesn't really feel that arcadey. It's just numbers on the screen. You're doing vague missions in a world ill-equipped to exist in. The game remedied this flaw by having it be very story-focused, and the DLC brings it back to the forefront by not doing that. Jimmy's Vendetta picks up where the Betrayal of Jimmy presumably left off. We rejoin our nondescript friend who looks like he threatens people who claim they've seen aliens, and basically we've got to escape from prison. Upon successfully doing this, we're immediately unleashed back into the open world in the exact same setup as the previous expansion. You're once again bouncing from hideous floating icon to boring objective, but at least this time there's less property damage objectives, as those really did annoy me. Now what do we get for partaking in these objectives, I hear you ask? Well, the answer's quite simple. Money. What can we spend money on? Well, not a lot. Mostly you'll find yourself allocating it to restocking ammunition. Beyond that, restoring your wanted status by changing clothes or indeed changing the plates on your car. Basically all the same things you could spend money on in the base game, which is not a lot. When locked into a highly story-focused experience, that isn't a big deal, but here, it kind of is. What is the point? I had to start getting creative with it. Repeatedly shoving and bribing a police officer was quite possibly all I could come up with. These were dire times.
I got an idea. Let's make a deal.
Thanks for the contribution to my retirement fund.
So the entire expansion is you investing in arse objectives for arse rewards, where the reward is equipping yourself for the next thing. Now that should in theory be fine. Games are not real, the only thing to do is the next thing. But when you really don't want to, you find yourself in a vicious cycle of time wasting. Even the missions are designed to be inconvenient through not being particularly well thought out. You may be hired to shoot up a gang of guys and the police will show up and attack you from the other direction. You may be sent to protect a witness and fend off waves of thugs, only for the authorities to also get involved, causing an uncoordinated mess where cover is entirely useless, despite Mafia 2's shooting mechanics heavily leaning into the cover shooter elements. The fact we're thrown into vague areas for objectives means it's very hard to get your bearings, and so you'll often find yourself caught out and killed a handful of times here and there. All this does is artificially inflate the gameplay, as by this point anybody with a brain who is stubborn enough to still be playing will want it to be over as quickly as possible. The gameplay is designed to challenge you in ways that aren't suited to the gameplay the game has. The story didn't have this issue with gameplay as everything was placed carefully, and even then it had its flaws. But here, it's wild and open, anything can happen, and you'll often find yourself caught in crossfires that you aren't equipped to deal with. You'll constantly find yourself, or your vehicle, or both, wanted by the cops, so you'll be dodging roses to change clothes, or change plates, or both. The game doesn't account for police response making the objectives far less clean, so they just show up and cause mayhem. And then there's a save system where if you want to save the game and close it a bit, which is understandable when you consider the content, you have to drive all the way back to one of your apartments or houses and save there. Not only do these DLCs have means for the content to take longer, you also spend a considerable chunk of your time playing them navigating around those objectives. I think the game's main story has a similar issue where you spend an awful lot of time driving from A to B, but these are often quite cleverly masked with conversations in the car that makes driving in the story worthwhile. Here you're just sort of driving along. There's no conversations to be had, Jimmy's on his ones, nothing's being said, nothing's being exchanged, we're just going across the map to do another bland thing before returning, and then rinse repeat. You get what I'm trying to say, these Jimmy DLCs at least don't play into any of Mafia 2's real strengths, but they are truly exceptional in highlighting the game's weaknesses. Anything that mildly frustrates you about Mafia 2's gameplay will absolutely infuriate you here. The gameplay wasn't designed around mindless open world stuff. It's oriented towards immersive storytelling, and that's exactly what's missing. Take for instance speeding. In the main story, if you get got speeding, it's not ideal. You get fined by the police, and that's immersive. You know not to do it again, and there are very few situations where you have to. Speeding is still present in the DLC, you can still be done for it. But it's not immersive anymore as A, it has no immersion to build off of, i.e. a well-told story, and B, you may find yourself having to engage with it a bit more often to beat an arbitrary timer. And now that the immersive value behind it is gone, it exists purely to be an aggravator. It's there so driving across the map without provoking a police reaction takes longer, and in events where you need a bit more pace, it's there to provoke unpredictability when the rest of the gameplay simply is not good enough for that to become the genuine positive that it perhaps should be. Another example of an immersion feature that feels at home within a well-told story but not necessarily in arcadey gameplay is running out of fuel. Here, that is nothing more than an inconvenience. Again, it isn't building off of an immersive narrative to make you feel like that's an interaction that's genuinely worth remembering. It's another hassle to contend with, though it is still quite rare. And that's really it. And that's the thing, I truly get these DLCs are not meant to be immersive, they're meant to be basically an arcade mode, and that is fine. But they aren't servicing either here. They have leftover immersion features from the main game impeding the arcadey nature of these DLCs, and these DLCs don't have any immersive storytelling to justify the leftover features being present. All we have are lazily thrown together leftovers, all well past its sell-by date by the moment you fire it up. The DLCs may have known what they were trying to be, but they certainly underestimated what it would take to actually accomplish that, as I can certainly appreciate a well put together arcade mode, one that prioritises points and combos. Call of Juarez Gunslinger, though an entirely different and utterly incomparable game, is a tremendous example of what can make arcade gameplay good, and the basis of the game being heavily oriented towards it is crucial. Mafia 2's gameplay isn't. The DLCs simply take it and use it as is. End result is we're left with a skeletal mode that feels like it exists for free roam purposes. I suppose there's a positive in there, you can now drive around Empire Bay to your heart's content at will, but you're just about removed enough from the bulk of the immersion to no longer see the value in doing that, and you aren't shifted towards arcade elements enough to see the value in that either. It's all incredibly strange, it must be said. But if you think these DLCs did something bad, you'd be right, but I'd argue Joe's Adventures is significantly worse. Now, to throw an oxymoron at you, Joe's Adventures is likely the strongest DLC of the three. It's not saying much, but as we go I think you'll see what I mean when I say that somehow makes it worse. Well, to begin with, the good news is we're no longer shackled to this personality void turnip. Instead, we're playing as Joe Barbaro, and events begin with Joe looking out the window to see Vito getting arrested by the authorities, and thus he embarks on a mission to get to the bottom of what the hell is going on. He tries to get a hold of Henry and fails, but manages to get a hold of this guy who tells him that the whole gas stamp scheme seems to have collapsed, and there's a witness out there who knows too much and needs to be dealt with, otherwise everyone's in trouble. So we embark on something of a damage control mission. That's not hugely important. What's important is this opening promises a much stronger DLC than the last two, one that plays into the game's storytelling strengths a lot more and uses the set piece layout of weaving the storytelling with gameplay elements, and that was exactly what was missing from the Jimmy crap. And on top of that, we get to play as Joe, a character with an actual personality, a character with ties to the main story, and the DLC appears to function like extra chapters to the game, which is great. It begins incredibly strongly, following God knows how many hours partaking in mind-numbing activities with a third-person view of a testicle. The opening of Joe's Adventures presents itself as the much-needed breath of fresh air. The gameplay is considerably more engaging, our protagonist is considerably more likeable and obviously loves a good burger, and there is actual storytelling going on. Better yet, the events are memorable. A high-speed chase atop an icy river is insane. That rich, wintry atmosphere of the early game is as beautiful as ever. So, you're probably thinking, what's the issue? Well, it's all a lie. You see, after dispatching the witness, Joe returns to Freddy's bar to meet with Luca to inform him of a job well done, where Luca informs Joe that Vito will be getting the best lawyer possible, and that he'll be out in no time. The game rather comedically cuts to the scene where Vito is being sent to prison for 10 years and will not in fact be out in no time. This naturally angers Joe, who then goes to Luca and confronts him, and all Luca says is, "We'll talk about it tomorrow." Come the next day, Joe is informed by Henry that Luca is sending dudes to kill him, and that if he wants to survive, he'll have to skip town. Finally, Joe's Adventures, taking us to brave new lands to try new things. Well, what's this? A time jump to 5 years later? You mean we skipped the adventure? Joe returns to Empire Bay 5 years later, dressed like the walls of an autism assessment room. So while Vito's been in prison, he's been somewhere. We'll never know where. He was just not here, which I think if anything cheapens Joe's placement as the character that helps Vito get set up in the main story, but hey, I digress. The big issue I have from here is the rest of the DLC functions exactly like the abhorrent Jimmy ones. We get splash screens, and then we get randomly timed missions, and the storytelling just completely disappears. It becomes arcadey like the others, and that is incredibly annoying. The DLC basically played the guise of not being like the Jimmy DLCs, until suddenly it's exactly like them, except we're playing as Joe Barbaro, who may have his own fist-fighting animations, and that is really cool, but it is not going to save a shit DLC from being shit. So thus begins a new saga of carrying out generic objectives that are timed because the developers said so, and thus all the value it might have had has now dissipated entirely, dead set upon the throne of lies that is its own introduction. It reels you in under the illusion of being actual storytelling, and then very abruptly gives you the finger. This is the strongest of the 3 expansions and also simultaneously the worst. Everything that's true of the other DLCs, beyond the opening, they're true of this one. But it lures you in with the illusion that it understands you're probably fed up with running around doing random generic crap, offers you a brief misleading departure from that, and then once it's earned some goodwill and your guard is down, it abruptly switches up to that same uninspired, miserable format. I want to know who was behind these DLCs. Were they high throughout, or only most of the time? Because surely 2K Czech knew they had rubbish on their hands here. I have finally played Mafia 2's DLCs, and I can confirm they are in fact dreadful. They cheapen Mafia 2 considerably by shining a glaring spotlight on the game's flaws. And they do this by withdrawing the critical positive and telling us to shove it. They appear to be a hodgepodge of cut aspects from the base game, and were churned out back in the day for a little bit of extra profit. I wouldn't say it's disappointing, as I had the benefit of knowing that going in, playing them now. But if you ever find yourself going, hang on a minute, I like Mafia 2 too much, the DLCs are waiting for you. But I think I've wasted enough of your time talking about bad DLC to an otherwise great game. So, I'd like to thank you all for watching this video. I do really hope that you've enjoyed it. I know it's a short one, but I wanted it to come out relatively early as a companion to my bigger Mafia 2 video that you can watch at any time you like if you haven't already, and if you have, I really appreciate it. But hey, be sure to go ahead, leave this video a like if you're new, maybe hit the subscribe button if you fancy it. I'm not in the market of forcing people to do that, but if you would, it really helps me, and by me, I mean my ego, and maybe leave me a friendly comment so I can return from my existential crisis in a healthy state. But look, with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point, but until next time, please take care and goodbye.